Our film starts with a voice telling us that Count Dracula is dead, but his disciples are still around corrupting the world. We then see a woman in a carriage. She begs the driver not to drive so fast, as we can clearly see that he's being reckless. He ends up stopping when there's a log in the middle of the road. The driver moves the log, but as he drives off, you see someone grab onto the carriage. They stop at a town where the barkeep freaks out when he finds out the woman is there by herself. When they tell her she needs to leave immediately, it's too late and the carriage driver drives off in a hurry. They attend to her and try to help her get away as fast as they can, with her being very confused as to why they're freaking out, but before that happens, a stagecoach comes and that makes everyone uneasy. An older woman gets out and invites the stranded woman to drink with her. The older woman introduces herself as the Baroness Meister, and the younger woman explains to her that she's going to a nearby school to be a student teacher, and much to the dismay of the bar's owner, asks the Baroness to take her there, which she agrees to, but not until the morning. They get into the Baroness's carriage and head off, but not before the girl introduces herself as Marianne Danielle. When they get to the Meister Castle, Marianne is introduced to the castle's caretaker, and even though they are supposedly the only two there, she has a place for someone else, and when Marianne goes out onto the balcony, she sees a man across the way, which the caretaker tries to convince her was just a figment of her imagination. Baroness Meister admits to her that she did see someone, and that person she saw was her son, who was not well mentally, which is why no one comes to the castle anymore, and why she's lonely. She says she has nothing to do with him due to the mistreatment he has done to her in the past, which Marianne seems to not take a hint that she's trying to tell her that the guy is bad news. So far in this film, she's been pretty clueless about a lot of things. With that being said, that night she heads out to the balcony and sees the guy about to jump, freaks out, and then heads to the place she wasn't supposed to go to in order to try to talk sense into the person she was warned was very dangerous. When she sees him, he tries to convince her that he's the victim. He introduces himself as Baron Meister and tells Marianne that his mother is holding him hostage in order to maintain rule of the land, and that the stories of him being dangerous are a lie. She, not being too swift of all the signs at this point that he's lying, totally buys the act and goes looking for the key to free the Baron. She goes to the Baroness's room and tries to find the key, but ends up having to go out a window onto a ledge as the Baroness comes back in. She did find the key before she left and gives it to the Baron, who asks her to meet him outside. Before she does, the Baroness shows up demanding the key. Marianne runs away and into the Baron's arms. He tells Marianne to go to her room, and she completely ignores that the Baron has hypnotized his mother right in front of her. As Marianne is in her room, she hears the castle caretaker freaking out from her window, so as per usual, she heads toward the unsettling sound just to ask what's wrong. Marianne, still being ridiculously airheaded, can't see that she might have did something wrong. The caretaker takes her over to the Baroness's body, resulting in Marianne running off, accusing the caretaker of killing her. Again, this woman was supposed to be a teacher. We then see the caretaker talking to the Baroness's body, who we see has a bite mark on her neck, and blames her for spoiling the Baron and apparently bringing him young women to feed on over the years. She says he's going to have to come back before sunup. As for Marianne, she's found on the side of a road by a stagecoach unconscious from exhaustion and is revived by a doctor named Van Helsing, who brings her back to the village. The bar owners explain that the keep is closed due to the death of a village girl. Dr. Van Helsing asks to see the body and notices that the villagers have put wild garlic on her. The doctor then examines her neck and finds bite marks. Dr. Van Helsing then asks Marianne if she's ready to leave, and on the carriage ride to get her to the school, he tries to smarten her up that the Meisters equal bad, but again, pretty lady not that smart, and words are hard, as she still tries to explain how she needs to go back to the castle to get her stuff. They arrive to the school where the principal acts like a complete jerk to Marianne for being late until Dr. Van Helsing flashes his credentials, resulting in him sniveling and groveling for forgiveness. After that, Marianne is introduced to the other student and teacher at the school, Gina. When the doctor gets back to the village, he arrives in time to hear an argument between the father of the dead girl and the town priest, who is basically condemning him for burying the body because she's probably a vampire. After the father leaves, we then find out that it was the priest who called Dr. Van Helsing to town as he had suspicions of vampires. As Dr. Van Helsing is heading to the cemetery where the girl is buried, he finds what seems to be the Meister's caretaker on the girl's grave, seemingly talking to her, telling her she needs to push her way out of the grave, which she eventually does, with the garlic they put on her having absolutely no effect on her. The priest grabs the caretaker, but she tells the girl to run, with Dr. Van Helsing going after her. She ends up getting away when she turns into a bat, but not before getting a few attacks on the doctor in that form. Dr. Van Helsing then decides to head to the Meester's castle, which he knows to be the root of the problem thanks to Marianne, and heads right to where the Baron was held. He goes to find the coffin just to find it empty, and is confronted by the Baroness, who is now herself a vampire. The Baron tries to ambush Dr. Van Helsing, but the doctor gets the upper hand and the Baron flees. The Baroness admits to Dr. Van Helsing what we heard from the caretaker earlier, that had she had the Baron killed when he became a vampire instead of keeping him alive and locking him up, all this could have been avoided, and now she has to do whatever he wants. The doctor informs her there is one way to prevent that, insinuating destroying her, which she seems to be okay with. Back at the girls' school that at this point I almost forgot about, the school marm comes to Marianne's room very excited about the fact that she has a guest, but plays a pronoun game instead of telling her who it is, confusing her as she wasn't expecting anyone. When they get downstairs, it's the Baron. When the school marm asks if the Baron's mother will be joining them, she informs her that his mother has died, which for some reason surprises Marianne, even though she literally saw the corpse. Anyway, the principal eventually shows up and goes on a tantrum, this time calling Marianne a hussy, up until the point that the Baron informs him that he owns the school, and again this results in the principal groveling. At this point, he should figure out by now that any guy that looks in her general direction is probably rich or powerful. He informs them that he is going to marry her, and she is to stay there until the wedding. That night, Gina starts gushing to Marianne about how great being engaged to a Baron must be because she's sad and lonely and probably hasn't seen a real guy in forever outside of the principal and Dr. Van Helsing. As she's sulking, a bat flies through the window, which ends up being the Baron. He hypnotizes her to come to him and he bites her. Back at the Meister castle, we watch as Dr. Van Helsing sticks the Baroness. He heads back to the pub and informs the priest of what he did, but the priest admits that the caretaker got away. After a comic relief segment with a sick doctor who doesn't take too well his own medicine, we're informed that one of the girls at the school has died. The priest asks the doctor to bring Dr. Van Helsing, which he then agrees. We then get there and find out that it was Gina who had died. They were told the window was open, and we see that she has bite marks on her neck. The doctor tries to pass it off as an animal bite, but Dr. Van Helsing tells him it was a vampire, which he doesn't believe. Dr. Van Helsing asks the doctor to leave everything to him. He then tells the family to lock the body in a secure location and have 2 people guarding it at all times under the guise that she died of a contagious fever that needs to be quarantined. Before Dr. Van Helsing leaves, Marianne tells him that she's engaged to the Baron, which of course freaks him out as he knows that the Baron's a vampire. That night, we see they have placed Gina's coffin in a stable. Marianne comes in and relieves the school marm of coffin wash duty. As the stable master is showing her stuff from the wall, one of the locks on the coffin falls off, though noticeably is not opened. Marianne sends the stable master off because obviously being alone is much better in this situation. The stable master gets attacked by a bat as soon as he leaves the stable, while just inside, Gina's coffin opens and she sits up and flashes her fangs. In one of the most iconic female vampire scenes in history, Gina tries to convince Marianne to let her give her a kiss and forgive her for letting the Baron love her. She tells Marianne that the Baron is at the old mill and they can go together. Just then, Dr. Van Helsing, who found the stable master's body, barges in, resulting in Gina running off and Marianne fading. After getting her away from the stable, Dr. Van Helsing informs Marianne that the Baron is a vampire, but she gets cranky about it before eventually being convinced to tell him the info that Gina gave about his whereabouts. The doctor heads to the old windmill, but as he looks around, gets ambushed by Gina and the vampire village girl, who are there with the Meister's caretaker. That doesn't really go too far as he protects himself with a cross, which he ends up losing after the caretaker falls to her death holding it. The Baron then appears and they have a knockdown drag-out fight while the 2 vampire women watch. The Baron eventually gets the upper hand and bites Dr. Van Helsing. When Dr. Van Helsing comes to, he realizes he's been bitten and he uses a branding iron to burn the wound. Back at the school, the Baron comes barging in, fangs out, and goes after Marianne. Maybe at this point she might realize he's dangerous, but no guarantees. He brings her back to the mill and does the classic Hammer villain deal where he could have turned her, but instead he wanted the doctor to see it happen. That gives Dr. Van Helsing time to sprinkle him with holy water. The Baron, in retaliation, sets fire to the place by knocking the hot coals Dr. Van Helsing used onto a batch of straw, but the doctor was prepared and had a whole escape route that included turning the windmill propeller to make a cross and shadow, which apparently kills the Baron because he collapses and the credits roll. What happened to the vampire girls? Who knows? So what you should have noticed at this point is for a movie called The Brides of Dracula, there was no Dracula and the brides have very minimum roles. It is said that one of the titles the film had been developed under was Disciples of Dracula, and that would have been a much more accurate description. Hammer would eventually make a true brides film with 1973's Count Dracula and the Vampire Bride, which is also a weird title, being in that movie he literally has a bunch of brides, not just one like the title insinuates. But between the two movies, this one is a lot more memorable today, as the Gina confronting Marianne scene is referenced quite a bit in modern pop culture. Thanks for watching. If you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to know every time I update. If you want to help my channel grow, please check out my Patreon, where you can get access to content early, as well as see the content that can't be uploaded here on YouTube. Link will be in the description. Until next time.